Hey, John, we're out here at T-Mobile Park, and we interviewed Dan Wilson earlier in the show. But one of the things that stuck out in our time here is right now the field is sort of torn up. I'm not sure what's going on with it. They're replanting or resodding, whatever they're doing. But we saw Ichiro Suzuki. No surprise to you, I'm certain. He comes out here, and it's kind of dark out on the field. Not all the lights are on. He comes out with his interpreter. He's in full uniform, and he's playing long toss with him. And he still has a cannon, John. He was in probably mid-right field throwing down the line, and his guy was set up right around home plate. And he's just taking, it's like a pitch for him. He's not getting a running start. He's not skipping, crow hopping, just firing the ball to the interpreter who catches it. Interpreter would get a running start and then skip about 3 or 4 more steps and throw it back to him and then run back to home plate to catch the ball Ichiro's throwing with just, like I said, one step like a pitch. It's amazing to watch this guy's love of baseball, that he's out here at this time of year. It's freezing right now, and he's out there just playing long toss and still has a cannon.
I want some of that in my life, is what I would say, first of all. He's an inspiration to us all, and certainly Charlie knows him well from having played with him. It really is remarkable to behold. And yes, the physical tools we talk about, and certainly they're part of the reason why he is in Cooperstown by a near unanimous acclamation. But it's also the mental discipline and commitment to the craft. And whether you talk about professionalism in business or practicing law, practicing medicine, whatever it is that you do, Ichiro embodies just the absolute apex of that. And you're right. He views whatever routine you have in life that helps you every day. For Ichiro, it's baseball. And he wants to still be around the game. We saw him recently, and of course, you've seen the video. He pitches in the All-Star game they play in Japan, where a group of retired NPB players, and of course Ichiro is part of that, they play against the high school All-Star girls team, because girls and women's baseball in Japan is a really big sport. And so the prize, if you're part of the national high school girls All-Star team, is you get to play against Ichiro. And so Ichiro actually has become one of the leading advocates among retired male ball players for women's baseball in Japan and around the world. It's really an important part of his legacy. So it certainly does not surprise me, but it does it makes me smile, as I'm doing right now, to hear that story about Ichiro still doing what he's doing. And we know that he is, of course, a constant presence around the team now. His relationship with Julio Rodriguez, the fact, of course, he's a longtime friend and teammate of Dan Wilson, now the manager. So that's a pretty cool connection that it'll be a former Ichiro teammate having the reins of the Mariners from the beginning of the 2025 season.
Yeah, and you just brought up, you were talking about them pitching against the girls out there in Japan. Wasn't there a video of Ichiro plunking one of those girls? Did he hit one?
I'm not sure.
I thought I saw that.
I'd have to go back. Ichiro is known for his excellent command when he's throwing from 60 feet 6 inches or from the outfield. So I'd have to go back and confirm that with video. But okay. I do know he takes it very seriously. And again, you realize this: if he's going to play one game a year, and he may play in different settings, but if he's going to play one regular baseball game a year, he's going to train for the other 364 as if that's Game 7 of the World Series, because he does care that much about any time he steps on a baseball field.
Amazing. Now, speaking of Ichiro, I know everyone up here is quite, let's just say, irked, irritated, curious as to why he wasn't a unanimous Hall of Fame inductee. So on your side of the things, you have the ability to vote, and did it surprise you? Were you expecting that it was going to be 100% unanimous?
I had hoped that it would be unanimous, because that is a truly special realm within the Hall of Fame. That's inner circle of the inner circle. Of course, Rivera is the only one that's ever been unanimous. But I also realized this: to get 99% of people to agree on anything in 2025 is a pretty high bar. And so it did not surprise me that there was one outlier. I don't think there's any legitimate reason to do that, even if you wanted to support a candidate down ballot to try to keep them on for next year and get them more than 5%. I had a couple of those votes with Kinsler and McCann, and they still fell short of 5%. So my effort in that regard was not rewarded. And yet, Charlie, I still had plenty of room on my ballot to vote for Ichiro. So
exactly.
The notion now, if your ballot was limited to 5 people, then I might have an easier time understanding the thing that I still can't understand, which is why you wouldn't vote for Ichiro. So if it was a 5-player limit, I would respect the idea that if you had to sustain people, that you might say, well, everybody's going to vote for him, and I don't have to vote for him. I don't love that explanation, but I would get it if there was a 5-player limit, but it's a 10-player limit. There was plenty of room to make your statement elsewhere and still vote for one of the most obvious Hall of Famers we will ever see. Maybe in my lifetime, the most obvious Hall of Famer is Ichiro, and he should have been unanimous.
I completely agree, which you bring up a good point about the voting system, and each voter has 10 votes. I guess up to 10 they can choose. What is the justification for not picking 10? It seems like you have this great ability to vote someone in, and it feels like you're choosing not to use all of your votes for whatever reason. Have you talked with colleagues about this as to why they only pick 3, 4, 5 guys?
I have, Charlie, and I'm glad you asked the question, because it is something that we discuss among the writers. And to back up for our listeners, there are 2 ways to get to the Hall of Fame. One is by the baseball writers ballot, which was announced last week, and the other is what we call the Era Committee, which is a combination of historians, people who are already in the Hall of Fame, executives. That's a smaller group of 16 people, where if you are not elected by the writers, or if you're an executive manager, umpire, you're under their purview. But what Charlie's asking about, what I'm talking about, is what the writers can do, which is if you've been retired from between 5 and 15 years, you are under our purview for on the ballot every year, as long as you get 5%. And that was what I was referring to a short time ago, where I voted for McCann and Kinsler because I believe them to be deserving, at least deserving enough to stay on the ballot for a second year, but they fell off after 1 year. And which happens, to your point, Charlie, way too often for good players. Jim Edmonds was one and done. Years ago, Lou Whitaker, inexplicably, was one and done. Bernie Williams was one and done. Matt Holliday was one and done. Carlos Delgado, one and done.
Will
They're
Clark,
really good players.
Yeah.
Really good players that at least, and for me, I look at it, gentlemen, as being its own form of recognition that we talk about you every winter. That Mark Burley, who I vote for every year and believe strongly in the durability, and look at how many innings he had pitched, and compare his resume to Sabathia, who's in on the first ballot, and Lester, who's got a good chance too, then why not Burley? So I vote for Burley every year. Just the fact that I vote for Burley every year and that we talk about Burley every year is part of the recognition. And there are players who, if they get 10 years in the show and they're on the ballot, they want to get that ballot framed. Just the notion of their name being on the ballot is a big deal. Of course, to make 10 years, and Charlie, you understand what that means among the fraternity of baseball players. So I am someone that votes for 10 because I like to either A, look for reasons to honor someone, or B, to find reasons to keep them on the ballot and have their career be continually evaluated with the fullness of time and the context of history. But there are others, like my dear friend Joel Sherman, who I sit beside on these Hall of Fame shows every year. And Joel, I believe this year voted for 4 or 5 players. He's a small hall guy, and he believes that it's a very, very high bar, and that's okay. There's room for Joel's thought process. There's room for my thought process. We're all part of the same group. And what I would always mention to people is it takes 75%. 75. A supermajority, okay? Congress, you think about, okay, 2/3 majority or 60 votes to get past a filibuster. 75% for us. That is a really high standard. And people that we often get the criticism of different critics or people that want to talk about it. Okay, fine. They say, well, you didn't vote for Bonds, you didn't vote for Clemens, you didn't vote for Schilling. Well, I did, and a vast majority of people in my group did. We just didn't get to 75%. So as much as, yeah, they don't have plaques in Cooperstown, but let the record reflect. A majority of us thought that Schilling and Bonds and Clemens all belonged. They just didn't clear 75, which tells you it's really, really hard to get there.
Well, you can tell Sherman the next year he needs to vote for 10. That's you can give him a tip from me.
I will pass along the message, Charlie.
Hey, so JP, you voted for Bonds and Schilling and those guys. Obviously, they're attached to the whole steroid era and controversy. So do you currently vote for A-Rod and Manny Ramirez?
I don't, because they were suspended. That's the line that I draw. And in Bonds and Clemens' case, yes, they were mentioned in the Mitchell report. They were not suspended, so I vote for them. In Schilling's case, he has done a lot off the field that has complicated his candidacy in the realm of social media and other things that he has done and said. I still voted for him because I draw a sharp line between what you've done from a baseball standpoint and then other things that are apart from the game. And so it's a difficult thing to think about every year about what is relevant, what is not. But I voted for Schilling consistently. And so, but I do not vote for Ramirez and A-Rod because they were suspended under MLB's policy once it became clear what the rules were. Interestingly, if A-Rod's candidacy did not include the biogenesis suspension and only included the revelation when you go back to the Selena Roberts report in 2009, which is a long time ago, I would have voted for him because that happened before the testing occurred. It was once the testing happened and then he was suspended, significant suspension. At that point in time, that was when I said, okay, I'm not going to vote for him. In the same case, Andy Pettit admitted limited use of HGH. I will vote for him. I plan on voting for him next year because he was not suspended either. It's a difficult. Am I splitting hairs here? Yes.
Yes.
But we don't have full information about a lot of things in life, guys. So we got to do the best that we can, and that's my best effort as being as fair as I can possibly be, realizing that we do not know if there are already players in the Hall of Fame who use PEDs. That is an impossible thing to know, and we will probably never know that for sure.
But in the case of Bonds, I would take the other side of it and say, okay, yeah, he didn't get suspended, but you've got grand jury testimony where he says, yeah, I took the cream and the clear. I thought it was flaxseed oil. And this is a guy who never hit 50 home runs in his career, and then in his late 30s hits 73. I mean, come on, man.
In San Francisco, nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, he didn't get suspended. I feel like we're nitpicking a bit into whether he was legitimately dopey and had no idea what he was taking. That's all nonsense.
Well, I mean, Bob, it's a fair point, but what I'm saying here is that the entire era of that period in the game was so murky about what was okay, what was not. I realized fully that. Was it unethical? Yes, it was unethical the entire time. But was it explicitly prohibited by Major League Baseball? And that is the part that I go back to. Because otherwise, to me, Bob, it looks like we'd be guessing and playing favorites about, okay, if one person is alleged in a book to have used, is that enough to keep them out? And how do you weigh that against testimony, against what was written about in Game of Shadows and then became part of the Mitchell report? It's all very complicated. And so we don't know, to be honest, what percentage of the pitchers that Bonds was facing were using during that era. And so given that I don't know that, I have a hard time voting to keep him out. And I'll say this, though. For Schilling, for Bonds, for Clemens, their cases are now able to be taken up by the Veterans Committee. But
right.
Especially in the case of Bonds and Clemens, they were way better supported by the media than they were by their own brethren, whether whether it's people who are in the Hall of Fame, historians, people on the board there that have connections to the committee. And so that's where I find it ironic that there was always this portrayal, especially with Bonds. It was Bonds versus the press. They didn't get along. Well, we seem to support him more than the other group does. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind, that while the media, and by the way, it's not one of the reasons why we don't know who didn't vote for Ichiro is every ballot is not disclosed who voted, what exactly they voted for. It's still private unless you decide to make it public. But a lot of us do make it public. And the annual award voting, MVP, Cy Young, Rookie of the Year, Manager, all of that is explicitly public. So we have to answer for it. I mean, if you want to be anonymous, I suppose you can be. But if you're working in the public realm as I do, my ballot's public, my MVP votes are public, my Cy Young votes are public. If you got an issue, as they say, I'm on Twitter, you know where to find me. I mean, it's something where it's part of the job. And I think it's incumbent on us, if we have a place in the game, to be accountable. And I really believe that the media, by and large, this might be one of the handful of positive things about social media, we have become more accountable because we hear, believe me, we hear from y'all all the time. So that is not we do not suffer right now, Bob and Charlie, from a lack of feedback. We've got plenty of feedback about how people feel about the work that we do.
And nice.
It's always reasonable. It's well put, well thought out, well crafted.
Yes, but
Hey,
most of those replies begin with, Mr. Morosi, comma, I take under advisement your thorough work on the ballot. I wish to point out to you these several issues. And then they enumerate them in very, very cogent arguments.
Right.
So
right.
articulate.
Yeah. Hey, one thing we were talking about earlier is what's going to happen as we watch the Dodgers accumulate. Now they're stacking arms for the bullpen, and they're just they've been the big winners of the offseason, and everybody's talking about the amount of money they're spending and the amount of money they're deferring, and you even got Hal Steinbrenner, which I think is rich. I think this is hilarious because the Yankees forever were known as the evil empire, and they're just going to buy everybody and pay more than anybody. His quote, "It's difficult for most of us owners to be able to do the kinds of things they're doing," talking about the Dodgers. We'll see if it pays off. Well, they've got the third highest luxury tax payroll at just under $303 million. So Yankees aren't innocent. It's just rich that the owner of the Yankees is out there basically talking about the Dodgers like, wow, the rest of us owners, we're in a tough spot. But what's the solution? We've talked about the idea of a salary cap pretty much being a non-starter with the players union. We know that after the 26th season, most people feel like there's going to be a work stoppage. So what is there, in your mind, is there any level of optimism, A, that they avoid the work stoppage, and B, that they can address this without a salary cap, and maybe they institute something about the deferred money where you can only defer X percentage of salaries, or there's going to be a salary floor, or what do you see in a way to mitigate some of what's going on with the Dodgers and doing that without a salary cap?
Yeah, Bob, it's a great question, and it's one that basically for the next 2 years we're going to be talking about because the issue is not going away. I think when you look at the sport right now, you've got the Dodgers, they're a league unto themselves, spending-wise, and their overall economic strength. Then there's the next group down of other significant high-dollar, big-money teams, Mets, Yankees, you'd put in that group. The Phillies, Toronto, the Cubs, depending on how things play out in a given time. The Giants can kind of get in that conversation. And then basically everybody else. And do I believe that it can be rectified without a work stoppage? Yes, I do. And I would point out that even the last time we had a CBA negotiation, it went on where there was still issues deep into the offseason, but we didn't lose any games. Okay, there was a lockout. We didn't lose games. And that is what I hope in some way, shape, or form as this thing gets sorted out next time around, that we'll be able to avoid losing games. And it is, I think, premature to get too worried about it because there is a lot of runway between now and then. The one thing I would say is two things that stand out to me. Number one, think about how long Ohtani's deal is. Think about how long Soto's deal is. These are already deals that are on the books for a decade. how can you possibly change the rules when those deals are already out there? And could you have a rule that prohibits deferred money on future contracts? I suppose you could. That's something that could be instituted, although players seem to be okay with this because certainly it allows them to get a bigger number in terms of what their overall contractual stated value is. It also gives the team some flexibility. They end up still, believe me, if you're signing a big enough contract that has deferred money in it, you're probably going to be okay in terms of the big picture of life. So I don't know that either side would object to it too much unless the middle tier owners are saying it's giving an unfair advantage to the Dodgers, let's say, and then there becomes a conversation. I think this, which leads me to I think the big point, which is if it becomes a trilateral debate, a lot of differences of opinion among the three parties, and by that I mean the big market owners, the small market owners, and the union, or if you even split up that ownership group even more, where it becomes the Dodgers and then Yankees, Mets, Phillies, Blue Jays, Cubs, Giants, that group, and then everybody else, and then the players, the more it gets carved up, the less optimistic I would become, just because you're trying to serve a lot of different agendas at this point. So I do think it behooves everybody in the game to find a way to tighten the gap between the Dodgers and the Pirates and the Marlins. But I would also point out that this is not unlike trends you've seen economically in our country writ large, where when the market moves and you're just seeing more at the top and a bigger split in between that and the bottom. We have seen that happen in other venues of society. And I just think baseball has become the sports version of that, to where the rich are truly getting richer, and especially the teams, I would say, Bob and Charlie, that have the ability to have their own TV networks and ride through this turbulence that teams like the Mariners and the Guardians, the Rangers, other teams have been subject to in recent years. When you either own your own network or are the tentpole tenant of it, if you're the Yes Network with the Yankees, the Dodgers with their own, you are less subject to the whims of this streaming world and where it's all going, that honestly I am not nearly smart enough to be able to figure out where a lot of these prevailing winds are blowing.
He is Jon Morosi with us each and every week. You're the best, man. We appreciate you as always. Have a great rest of your week, and look forward to talking again next week.
My pleasure, guys. May we all be like Ichiro and Capo Caco, who continues to produce for the Kraken. Well done by Capo.
John, we appreciate you, man.
Thanks so much.